Hello, everyone. I am Don McCarty, and we are going to change this up just a little bit again. And we are going to be speaking to someone that's going to talk about how being alienated affects the adult person, the adult child. So coming from just the adult in this scenario. So Alyse, do you want to go ahead and get the conversation started with James?
Yep. So my name's Alyse Price-Tobler. I'm a psychotherapist and lived experience child, adult child of severe PA. And today, as part of our interview series, we're interviewing James, who is and also an adult child of severe PA. So it's a little bit of a different category. And he's going to speak not about his childhood experience, but what it's like for him living in the adult world and his struggles and just different experiences that he's had with regards to how he reacts to different situations and things like that. And we'll hear some of his story now. So welcome to our little Zoom space here, James. And we really, really appreciate you taking the time to share this story with you, because I know this is the first time that you've spoken about this publicly, and I just wanted to share with anyone who's listening that you've been flying under the radar, so to speak, for most of your life, and not having a voice is part of our indoctrination. So by having a voice, we're kind of trying to break that and heal from the parental alienation that we've all been exposed to. So, yeah, welcome to the room.
Hi guys, happy to be here. How are things?
Yeah, well, we're pretty happy, about having you here.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
So, do you want to sort of continue on with the thread a little bit about just giving us some insight into what it's been like with you regarding not having a digital footprint in the world, and why you sort of had that, and what and just lead on from there?
Sure. I guess it was from pretty much my earliest memories were being getting away and trying to, and having this spectre following us around, and always being trying to keep one step ahead, or making sure that we weren't visible, we weren't findable, if that's the word. And I guess it's just, I'm in my 50s now, and I think it was just a learned thing that's so deeply ingrained in me that I question it all the time, but it's almost like a point of comfort going back to it. It's almost like being home, being sort of like quiet and being in the dark and being hidden. It's really quite an odd thing to try and pull to pieces. And I'm hoping with some professionals they'll help me with that. But yeah.
Are you speaking to the alienation between your parents? Could you give us a little bit of context around that, James? Because
sure.
Yep.
My parents split, and when I was, preschool, and we spent the next few years keeping ahead of the alienated parent, or trying to. That was the doctrine, I guess, we were getting, that they were going to take us, that it wasn't safe to be with them, that we were at risk of being taken at any point, wherever we were, even though we moved quite a few hundred miles away from them. So we were always looking over our shoulders, and there was this paranoia that was fed to us by the parent that we were bonded to or aligned with.
Does that transfer has that transferred into your adult life? Do you still feel like you have that in certain areas?
I find it very difficult to trust people because the trust of the parent that we were aligned with has been destroyed. Growing older and gaining insight into why it happened, how it happened, and for whom's benefit it happened, has left me pretty very angry and very not much. I don't really have a relationship with either of my parents, so it's kind of left me with that. That's their legacy. So yeah, it's tough to talk about. Sorry, I'm a bit sort of all over the place.
No, that's totally understandable. And I just want to say to anyone who's listening at this point, if you're identifying with anything that James is saying, or this story is sounding true for you and you're being triggered, I'd like to share with you that self-care really needs to take place at this point. Because sometimes when we hear other people's stories, we can be triggered ourselves. So from a therapist point of view and a lived experience survivor point of view, I know when this happens to me, I need to go and speak to somebody, whether it's a trusted person in my family, or a therapist myself, or any of the lines that are available to just be able to speak to somebody. But please speak to somebody and just be very, very gentle with yourselves, and just know that during these interviews that you could be triggered at any point, and just to be very, very gentle around that, and seek some help with that. Don't just stay in the pain of it. And I think a lot of us who have this kind of trauma, we're not used to speaking up, and it can feel very, very overwhelming, and that other people don't understand it, especially when we're talking about this level of trauma where the alienator has actually caused a lot of what we call psychological splitting, and we're very, very enmeshed with the alienator against the targeted parent. This is a very severe form of parental alienation, and it can take a very, very long time to understand. And once we realize sometimes that this is actually what's happened, that can be really difficult for us as well. That realization stage of what's actually happened, and then realizing that we could still be enmeshed and still don't have a voice. So James is speaking up today, and he's we'll just take it really, really slowly, James. So I'll just hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, look, it does get better. Having lived through it, and it still has an influence on how I conduct myself, and it influenced it for me. It has impacted every interaction I've had with every human ever, because my background was informing my outlook about myself and who I was, and what my relationship was with anybody, whether it's just going down the street to buy some milk, or buying a car, or negotiating. I was always a second-rate person in my own head. I always thought that excuse me, anybody I met was automatically a better human than I was. And to get past that, I still struggle with it occasionally. I still struggle with having a voice. And I think that's what it was about. Never having a voice growing up, never being heard, never having my outlook or my opinion valued by the person I most trusted in the world, which was my alienating parent. I truly believe that that's what was causing, or that's what was informing my outlook. And it does get better. I mean, I was always terrified of buying, say, a car, because even though I didn't want to pay as much for the car as the salesman was wanting to sell it for, I was always I was terrified, because I know that I'm going to buy that car at that price, because I don't have a voice around negotiating, and you see what? That's an example. So I never went anywhere near secondhand cars or new cars or anything. So
But
it's
that's
been
true. An example that, you know, that is a little, it's like conflict. It's like it invites that conflict, and we want to avoid that sometimes.
absolutely just a conflict. I abhor conflict. It's just harmony, harmony, harmony. Let's all get along, you know. And I never caused fights, never got into any fights. Always backed away from fights. And there was never a sense of being valued enough to myself to stand up for myself, whether it's in a physical confrontation or a mental confrontation. So again, it comes back to being less than, and I think, and so that's what was always going on for me. And if anybody else is feeling that, you can. Well, I got past it with therapy, and talking to people I trusted, and hopefully my experience is helping other people out there who are just like, hey, that's why. And there's a lot. I hope there's at least, if I can get one light bulb moment out of this conversation, that's gold. So that's
Right.
yeah.
So your story's a little bit different in that you haven't well, you did reunify with your father when you were 18 or 19, but that didn't work out very well, did it? So you're not actually reunified with him now, and we know that I think the stats are saying that 30% will reunite, 30% won't, and 30% are ambivalent. So what's that space like for you at the moment, like with two alienated parents, basically?
It's my normal. I met him for a lunch when I was 18 with his mother, and that was probably one of the most awkward 3 hours or chunks of time in my life, because it was who is this person, and they were all trying to be chummy and I guess condense 15 years or 13 years of absence into, you know, like bring it back up to something that was approaching normal, whereas nobody was equipped to sort of to deal with a situation like that. So that was awful, and I didn't see him again until I was well into my 30s, probably hitting 40 actually. And I had a brief, probably saw him 5 or 6 times over a period of 12 months, and just realised that from his behaviour towards me and my family and his overwhelming self-interest, that it wasn't, might sound cold to the people who haven't lived it, but it wasn't worth the investment of my time in him. Yeah, to continue that relationship, because I wouldn't have got anything out of it. My family wouldn't have got anything out of it, yet he would have got a whole lot out of it. And
do you feel like when you say that it wasn't worth your time, does that come from a place of where you might feel like if he didn't feel like it was worth his time for you, is that kind of where that comes from?
No, it comes from, I hear what you're saying, but it comes from a place where I value myself way more than I used to, and perhaps like a pendulum, it's kind of swung the other way, where I might be perhaps overreacting, but this has been ongoing, and there might be a part of that that's the ingrained alienation of him, but it feels true to me. It feels true for me to sit with that, and I don't know what I'd learn from him. It's just the sort of person he is, because he just, yeah, I can't really relate to him. He's not a very spiritual, not a very deep, not a very not empathic at all whatsoever, human. So I don't really have anything to sort of, there's no commonality there.
So no bond, really.
No, and there's no bond because of the history, I guess. But even so, it's look, knowing him as I do, I don't think there would be any. I think it would be I'd be looking for something that he can't provide, that he's incapable of providing emotionally, or intellectually. He has very old school views on the place of women in the home and society, and he's quite bigoted, quite racist, and he's quite closed-minded. When I'm all about the inclusion, I'm all about openness, I'm all about helping people. I'm a humanist at heart.
Very different.
So
yeah.
there's just very, very few things, if any, that we could find to reach some sort of common ground. And whilst I'm mindful that there are others out there who are listening to this and are thinking, oh, well, what's the point? Please try and reconnect. Please try and, with your parents, please try and maintain that some sort of connection for both yourself and your alienated parent. But just be gentle, but as I tried to be. But in the end, I just saw, for me, in my experience and our personality types, it wouldn't have gone anywhere.
Well, and I think there's something to say about that, at least when we were talking about, we want children to, adult children to reach out and reunite. We would like for them to be able to have more than one meeting so that they can maybe have this long lasting relationship. But part of that is that the parent has to be prepared and willing and show up. So this is another important aspect. So it's not always up to the child to do the work. There is work on both sides. So the parents also have to be prepared and ready for this. And if they're not doing that, then it makes it really hard for this reunion to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with adult survivors of severe PA, the psychological splitting is very, very, very full on. And I know you know a little bit about that, James, but can you speak to that a little bit about what that psychological splitting's like for you? Do you still live in that world or not, with where you're psychologically split to the alienating parent?
I live a long way, probably, I don't know, 600-800 miles from one parent and probably 500 from the other. So I don't have any, there's nothing drawing me towards either of them, because I see them as an adult. I see them as adults from an adult perspective, not from a child perspective now, whereas I never had that insight previously, funnily enough. But I don't feel drawn, or I don't feel that pull. I don't feel that empathy. I don't feel that connection to either of them, to the alienating parent, because of how she conducted herself and what her priorities were, and how we weren't high on the list of considerations. And for him, my adult outlook towards him, and seeing him as another bloke, as another man, going, well, I'm not like you. I'm not even a bit like you. And yeah, I don't think that there's much there that's going to improve that. So my hope long term is to be more or less engaged with my mother, because I still have feelings that I'm not happy with, as far as being angry, being frustrated, being resentful, of having lived and grown up the way we grew up. So my hope is that with the support of the professionals that I'm been seeking and in touch with, that I'll reach the point where I no longer harbour those feelings of resentment and frustration and bitterness. Bitterness. I'd say there's some bitterness there, and that's just toxic. I don't like it. That's not who I am. It's not part of my makeup and how I see myself. But it's there. So that's what I'm doing something about it. I'm fortunate that I have some insight into my situation, and I'm open to investigating avenues of therapy and avenues of healing.
So could you share with us what therapies have been working for you and what didn't?
Sure. Cognitive behavioural therapy kind of brought up a few things for me, but not really resolved anything. Kind of stirred up some mud at the bottom, but hasn't really, like, I didn't really get any nourishment from it. It hasn't enriched my life much, but it's sort of like started me on that path. So if that's the simplest or the most available method of therapy available, give that a go, because it'll open your eyes to the concept of what it did for me anyway, to the concept of psychotherapy. And I was involved with the men's movement in Melbourne, in Australia, for a few years, and the insight that that gave me was very cool, because it showed me that men can be vulnerable, because I was brought up by my maternal, for a short time, with my maternal grandfather, and he was very, very old school, because he came off the land, and he was men don't cry, don't hit girls, which I subscribe to absolutely, never ever warranted, and I have never done it, nor would it cross my mind, and so I was like, oh, men are actually vulnerable, men are crying, it's actually safe to do that. And that was quite an eye-opener for me. I did lots of group work with that group of men, lots of one-on-one counselling, and recently I've been involved with EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and I don't think it's rationalization, it's another R, but it's like a bilateral stimulation.
Reprocessing. Eye movement,
yeah.
desensitization,
Yeah.
and reprocessing therapy.
There you go. That has worked wonders for me. I am less triggered by things that I would normally just be like straight up to 11. If I saw something straight to 11, oh, it's not an 11, it's a 1. Okay, let's just come back down again with everybody else. Don't mind me. I've had a traumatic upbringing. That's all going on in my head. Yeah, so that's you go through. I went through a few. I was asked to do a few experiences, write them down, and like a top 10 list, and I went through those with my therapist, and the volume's been turned down on all of those experiences, which sort of informs my outlook. It's bled out into my view of the world now, and it's not as scary a place, or it's not as confronting a place. It's actually a safer place than I thought it had been for years. So that's been really good for me. So that's the EMDR is the main one. I've been pointed towards psychodynamic psychotherapy. I had a recent inpatient stay at a private psych unit, and whilst good from a perspective of not having the distractions of day-to-day life, family, job, etc., it gave me that that space to sort of like turn towards myself rather than be helping everybody all the time, and using my energy that way. It was actually quite insightful and really good. Unfortunately, they kept trying to encourage me to begin antidepressants. I said, I'm not depressed. Anxiolytics, SNRIs. I said, no, I am anxious, but it's not because of stuff that's going on now. It's stuff that's happened to me in the past that's my roadmap of the world, you know. So I need to. I think I would be helped by getting more therapy and working with that. And they said, yep, we agree. Psychodynamic psychotherapy could be good, really good for you. It's a long-term thing.
So talk therapy instead of medication. You're on that track.
Absolutely. I've tried several of the SSRIs, family of drugs, SNRIs. Yeah, in my experience, they work for a short time. So getting over an acute phase of where I was at, but beyond that, they had limited. I just felt disconnected and not as clever. They dulled my intellect, and I don't like it. And so I felt more at odds with people, and I felt less connected to people, and they just compounded the existing situation in my experience. So therapy.
So do you think that in the initial stages, because often what we'll do is we'll combine a medication if it's required with talk therapy, but never just medication. What do you think about that?
I think that could work really well because you're approaching it from two completely different angles. So I think the combination, I think that could be really, really helpful and really positive for somebody. But yeah, I think had I had both of those, that could have really moved mountains for me. And I mean, I've been black. My outlook has been really bad, and I have had suicidal ideations and all taken to the point where I actually thought that was a viable solution, had a plan, had the whole bit, and I was brought back from that, and by people very close to me, and not by medical professionals, but just by people who said, yeah, what are you doing? How can we help you? What's been going on for you? How are you going? What can we do about this together? And having a feeling that somebody was actually listening and somebody was actually available and empathic, and just having someone there who would who are just like, wow, because feeling valueless, that was quite a surprise, quite a shock to me. I was going, what? You're actually interested? You actually want to help me? Why? I can't see the value in myself, so how can you? So that was where I was at with that, but it was I'm still here because of it. So thank you to those who helped me.
That's very, very key what you've just said there, because I think a lot of children who've grown up with severe PA, with somebody who's personality disordered, often the abandonment stuff is huge, and the need to matter is not there, and often the children won't be sort of given that need and having it filled, and then it can really become like kids being exposed to high levels of stress or adversity experiences that changes their brains, how their bodies are wired. It leads to changes in brain development. It inflames the cardiovascular system. Just so people out there who are listening might think, oh, you know, wow, what I don't understand what's going on with him. Like, it even can change how our DNA is read and transcribed, and the developmental behavioural problems can manifest later on in life in substance abuse, depression, underperforming in school, and suicide. And it's just really important that the attachment is secure when we're young, and to have a parent alienating the other parent, watching all of that, and just being in this constant state of hypervigilance, especially if we're not getting our needs met from the alienating parent, puts us at a real disadvantage when we get older. And then we're talking about not having an authentic sense of self, because we don't know who we are, because we weren't really validated or told, great job, you're a person, you're doing really well, keep tracking along that track. We don't get that. So it's a very different space for us. And Yeah, so I'm hearing what you're saying there, and it makes it very, very, very hard to exist in the world. Yeah, so I just thought I'd just throw that in there because it's very, very serious for us mentally, physically, in our adult lives, and we try and do the best that we can to cope all the time, and having talk therapy and, when needed, medication is really important. But if you were to say to the mental health professionals, because you've just shared with us your suicidality and suicidal ideation and stuff, and you shared that it was your family or people around you who'd supported you, and not necessarily, you didn't get much help from the mental health professionals. What could you say to them potentially, James, that if they're listening, as to how they could help better?
Maybe really listen to the person and have an understanding of what might be driving them to that state, and try to, I'm trying to articulate this, hang on. Try to make sure that this person has people around them who are safe, I think having a support network is absolutely critical. I think it's probably the most important factor. That's how it is for me anyway. So maybe as part of the therapeutic process, to map or to try and highlight for a patient with this background the importance of that support network and how to re-engage with them. Yeah, that would be as a factor in the therapeutic process, rather than here's some tablets, let's have a chat. It seems to be impersonal. From my experience, is it's fairly impersonal, and they do a great job, in my experience, with the probably 6 to 7 professional psychologists and 1 psychiatrist that I've dealt with, that I've had dealings with. But I think to take a more holistic, a broader outlook to the patient or with the patient, and to try and tease out what their support network's like and how supportive they actually are, or whether they're at risk with unsafe friends or unsafe family members, to get them the help that they need, so we can keep more people here.
Yeah, there's something that you said earlier too that made me think, in when you talked about how you wanted to, we need to feel validated in general. And I think a lot of times when we're kids, or even, in our vulnerable stages as adults, that vulnerability is, we love people how we want to be loved, right? So when you wanted to be validated, that's probably how you're treating other people. And then when you're not getting that back, sometimes that's where we feel the most isolated. So when you're talking to how people can help you, I think in a lot of ways in society, we've lost that capability of having that empathetic, demeanor, and really understanding people anymore. And bringing that back would be helpful in understanding how other people, and relating to other people that are going through stuff like this.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think the sense of community is kind of missing, and if you could get a little bit of that back, that might be good. We've become very self-centered, and I don't like it. I live in a city, Melbourne is a fair-sized city, probably 4.5 million, and yeah, just in an urban environment, and I don't feel that connected to the people around me or to the people living around me in their houses. I don't have a great sense of community. I do in my job, but that's kind of separate. So, yeah, I think if we could get a bit of that back, we could sort of like maybe claw back some of what we've lost.
Find our humanity.
Mm.
So I just want to read you both something, because previously on Natalie's interview, I thought that this would be good for her to hear too, but we talked about this after we'd finished the interview, and I've just looked up what I was referring to, but it's called, I don't know if any of you have heard of this, because it's called the open dialogue therapy. So this is Finland's alternative approach to mental illness. So I'll just read it briefly to you. This is what we would love to have in Australia. So almost 30 years ago, a group of clinicians in Finland decided to treat psychosis differently. Their approach, known as open dialogue, has impressive recovery rates, and now Australians are taking an interest. So basically, people who are experiencing a mental health crisis are treated as if they're isolated individuals in our system, as if what's going on is just happening inside sort of the chemicals in their head. So what they're doing over there in open dialogue have the clinical psychologists have been developing this since the 1980s, bringing the patient together with their family, friends and health professionals. It's a meeting of the minds to explore perspectives on the crisis at hand. Now, the program's founder, Jaakko Sikula, says the aim of the meetings is not to reach a rapid solution or to immediately change the direction or dynamic of the family. It's a dialogue to understand what this problem is all about and what has happened in the life of the client. So they say that the key to the crisis intervention is starting treatment really early, ensuring all voices are listened to, especially the patient. Now, we talk about this a lot in my circles, and basically the person doesn't go into the hospital, they actually stay in their home, and the team is sent out within 12 to 24 hours, and there's a team of mental health professionals that come into the person's home. The family is involved. The person has a very, very big voice in what sort of treatment. Even some of the neighbours, if they're close, are involved as well, so that they can help out as well. This is very, very different to how our system is structured, and it's quite controversial, but those people who are very, very high up in the mental health system over here in Australia, I speak to about this, and this is something that we would really, really love to have. So sometimes people can be hospitalised, but most of the time they're actually treated within a 24-hour period in their home. And I'm just trying to find the statistics on Finland, but basically their mental health system, they've hardly got anyone in the hospitals, and everyone's being treated out in the community, and they have a very, very different recovery rate to those of us over here in Australia. So it's definitely something to look at. If you want to Google it, it's Finland Open Dialogue, and it's very, very empowering for the person who's becoming unwell, because we know that once they become unwell, to be put into the system in the hospital can actually exacerbate the symptoms, and it can be a really scary process for a lot of people who aren't used to it. And we just would really, really love open dialogue to be here. I'd love to be working in an open dialogue system and to close down all our psych hospitals. I think that would be perfect.
Yeah. We talked about something along that line, I think it was just yesterday, about how I have somebody that is institutionalized and nobody in the family knows where or what the medical treatment is or anything. I mean, the family is not involved whatsoever.
Oh my God, Dawn, I know. That just does my head in. I'm so sorry
It's like, what, you know, when will we ever know? I mean, and are we going to find out because someday they knock on the door and all of a sudden that, you know, they were just released and dumped on the street and they finally figured out how to find their way? I mean, there's no involvement in this whatsoever. And then, so what are they doing to that person? What do they, you know, who is their advocate? Do they have one that actually doesn't just go with the system? You know, is it in the best interest of the patient, or is it just what the system really thinks that they do better than a family member or an advocate? It's terrible.
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely terrible. And it would be very interesting to hear what life is like for them, what their normal is, and
We have
being
no
that
idea.
institutionalized, and that's what we call it, institutionalized.
Mm-hmm.
We know that some of the psych hospitals of a few years ago were all closed down, and a lot of people were just turned out on the street in Sydney. And predominantly, a lot of our homeless do have very full-on mental health challenges, and you know, that's not okay. And we really need to have a look at this.
Well, I wonder
it's
what
not okay.
I wonder what it would look like if there was family involvement in this situation. You know,
Yeah.
any of our situations, really.